I'm John Strum, and this is Real Talk MS. It's August 28th, and we have a lot to talk about. But first, let me welcome you to episode 50 of Real Talk MS. Now, 50 episodes isn't a big milestone, but it is a milestone. So I want to thank each of you who take the time to listen, and especially those of you who send me email or message me on social media to let me know that you're finding value in the things that we're talking about. And if you're one of the people who the podcast is connecting with, the best way to wish me a happy 50th episode is by leaving a quick rating and review of Real Talk MS. If you have a moment to do that for me, just visit realtalkms.com/rating. That's RATING. And I'll say thank you again for choosing to be part of our listening audience. You know, part of the unpredictability of multiple sclerosis is that it can attack in so many different ways. MS can impact your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, your functional abilities, and your quality of life. And if your response to MS is to be seen by a single healthcare professional, some of those many aspects of MS can end up being overlooked and sometimes even unrecognized. So they go untreated. That's why the best approach to treating MS tends to be a team approach. My guest today is Dr. Jacqueline Nicholas, a clinical neuroimmunologist specializing in MS at OhioHealth in Columbus, Ohio. OhioHealth operates an MS comprehensive care center that uses this interdisciplinary team approach to provide personalized treatment that's based upon each patient's specific needs. But before we get to my conversation with Dr. Nicholas, there are a few other things that you should know about. This past week, researchers at Cleveland Clinic announced the discovery of a new subtype of MS called myelocortical MS, or MCMS. And the best way to understand MCMS is to review what we already know about multiple sclerosis. White matter makes up about half of the human brain. And if you have MS, when the immune system attacks, the brain's white matter is the prime target. Our white matter contains nerve fibers called axons, which are surrounded by myelin. And myelin protects these axons, and it helps to speed the communication between our nerve cells. So when demyelination occurs in MS, this protective substance is attacked by our immune cells. And this destruction of myelin is linked to nerve cell death that leads to progressive disability. Well, in this study, the research team analyzed the brain tissue from 100 MS patients who had donated their brains for scientific research after their death. And the research team found that 12 of the brains didn't have even a trace of white matter demyelination. But each of these 12 patients had suffered the nerve cell death that leads to progressive disability in multiple sclerosis. Well, the research team then compared the brain tissue samples from these 12 MS patients to brain tissue samples from 12 other MS patients and from individuals who had no neurological disease at all. And the team found MS demyelinated lesions in the spinal cord and cerebral cortex. That's the gray matter part of the brain that's responsible for memory and information processing. Well, they found that in both the myelocortical and typical MS patient samples. But there were no demyelinated lesions affecting white matter in the brain detected in any of the 12 myelocortical MS patient samples. So to sum up this breakthrough, this research demonstrates that contrary to what was previously believed, the death of nerve cells in MS can occur without any signs of white matter demyelination. And what makes this new subtype of MS, this myelocortical MS, even trickier is that while they were alive, the MRI brain scans of these 12 patients were indistinguishable from patients with traditional MS. And that's because part of the nerve cells were swollen in the 12 patients with myelocortical MS, and they looked just like typical MS lesions caused by white matter demyelination. In other words, using today's MRI technology, myelocortical MS can only be diagnosed after death. So this work opens up a whole new arena in MS research. For one thing, it pretty much demands the development of more sensitive imaging techniques and strategies so that myelocortical MS can be properly identified and diagnosed among patients while they're still alive. And it also creates a need for more precisely tailored treatment strategies for people living with all the different forms of multiple sclerosis. This is really a perfect example of how scientific discovery pushes forward scientific advancement. And if you'd like to learn more about this breakthrough research, I'll include a link to the published research paper in today's show notes. For the past year, we've been talking about what I'll call an ongoing effort on the part of the current administration to derail the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. In fact, I launched this podcast last year a couple of weeks ahead of the launch date that I had planned on because I wanted to talk about how the vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act that was about to take place in the Senate was going to adversely affect the nearly 1 million families living with MS across the United States. And while that Senate vote failed rather famously, the effort to undermine the Affordable Care Act has continued. And that effort alone has ended up costing every family living with chronic illness in the United States. And these are families that can least afford to pay more for health-related issues. This past week, the Nonpartisan Government Accountability Office, the investigative agency for Congress, released a report that highlights some of the misguided tactics that have been used and pointed out where and why the cost of health insurance will be increasing in the coming year. The agency found that the Health and Human Services Department broke with its own practice by failing to set enrollment targets for healthcare.gov last year. Now, healthcare.gov is the marketplace where individual Americans who aren't getting their health insurance from an employer can purchase their own individual insurance. Every important aspect of that insurance, the fact that it must include coverage for things like mental health and pregnancy, and the fact that everyone, including anyone living with a pre-existing medical condition, must be able to purchase that insurance. Well, all of that is mandated by the Affordable Care Act. Well, the Government Accountability Office recommended that the Health and Human Services Department resume setting goals because they said goal setting is considered a standard management tool for government agencies. Without setting numeric goals, Health and Human Services won't be able to measure whether it is meeting, and I'm quoting now, its current objective of improving Americans' access to health care. Well, the Health and Human Services Department responded that it doesn't believe setting enrollment targets is relevant at all. The Government Accountability Office found that the Health and Human Services Department used, quote, problematic and unreliable data to justify a 40% cut in funding for enrollment counseling programs. Well, the department responded that it's making changes to how those counseling programs are evaluated. And having said that, the department has further cut the funding for that program by about 70%. When the Health and Human Services Department eliminated money for open enrollment advertising by 90%, department officials said they were doing away with wasteful spending. But an internal study by their own department actually found that paid television ads were one of the most effective ways to enroll consumers. And armed with that information, the budget for TV ads has gone from $26.6 million in the final year of the Obama administration to $0 under the current administration. But here's where these efforts to undermine the Affordable Care Act affect all of us who purchase our health insurance on the so-called state exchanges. The Government Accountability Office's investigators found that the current administration contributed to premium increases for the coming year by canceling payments that reimburse insurers for maintaining lower deductibles and copays that are provided to low-income consumers. That forced the insurance companies to increase their rates and, in some instances, to completely stop doing business in certain regions of the country. All of this activity to undermine the effectiveness and the success of the Affordable Care Act is nothing short of an existential threat to the health care of every person living with a chronic illness in the United States, and that certainly includes every person living with MS. Without the protections of the Affordable Care Act, the cost of health insurance would skyrocket. And that's if it were even made available to people with pre-existing medical conditions, which is another battle that the administration is currently waging in court. So whether the benefits of the Affordable Care Act are eliminated through its repeal or simply gamed out of existence, as the Government Accountability Office has now documented, the result is the same. And that result should alarm and be completely unacceptable to anyone listening to this podcast. So I'm going to continue talking about these issues that threaten the well-being of people living with MS because I expect that everyone listening to this podcast in the United States is going to vote this November. And I'm certainly not going to tell you who to vote for because I don't even consider this to be a partisan issue. But I'm going to ask you to vote for the people who will vote for you. The candidates, no matter their party, who are going to represent your best interests. And I think those interests are pretty easy to understand. We need to fund important research that can take us closer to a cure for MS. We need access to quality, affordable health care. We need access to quality, affordable health insurance. And we need access to affordable medications. These aren't privileges. These are fundamental human rights. They represent the foundation upon which a minimal quality of life can be built. So you can be sure that as the midterm election draws near, we'll be talking more about the legislative issues that affect people living with MS and their families every single day, because we want to support those legislators who want to support us. Studies suggest that dysphagia, or problems swallowing, may affect between 30 and 40% of the people living with multiple sclerosis, and a new study from Australia points out that this symptom alone can significantly reduce the quality of life for MS patients. Dysphagia can lead to complications including dehydration, malnutrition, and aspiration, which can further lead to breathing difficulties, fatigue, and pneumonia. And this doesn't yet take into account the toll that dysphagia takes on an individual's psyche. I can speak to this firsthand, as my wife Jean developed what became very serious problem swallowing as her MS progressed. As Jean's dysphagia became more pronounced, she transitioned from eating solid food to drinking thick liquids like fortified milkshakes, to finally receiving all of her nutrition by means of a feeding tube, and she's received her nutrition that way for the past 12 years. But that kind of transition is never a neat and orderly one. It's certainly one thing to simply say Jean transitioned from eating solid food to drinking thick liquids, but every step of the way as her MS progressed, Jean never surrendered to disability until it was made abundantly clear that she had no choices left. So I can still recall having to apply the Heimlich maneuver to save her life as she choked on a small bite of solid food. This wasn't a mild case of, oh geez, something is caught in her throat. In this particular case, Jean's face had turned blue and her lips had turned black from lack of oxygen. This actually happened while we were eating dinner with a couple of close friends, and one of them had called 911 when Jean had started choking. Well, by the time the paramedics arrived, she had already returned to breathing normally, and one of the paramedics told us that on calls like this one, they were always too late. By the time they arrived, the problem would either already be resolved, as it was in our case, or it would end very badly and very sadly. And in all of my years as Jean's caregiver, this has been the single worst moment that I can recall. It was so frightening that the memory of that particular event still haunts me more than a decade later. So Jean and I may have discovered firsthand what the research team at the University of Sydney was able to identify. They looked at a sample of 103 adult MS patients made up of 82 people with relapsing remitting MS, 11 people with primary progressive MS, and 10 people with secondary progressive MS. And the researchers found that swallowing difficulties tend to increase with advanced stages of disability. As far as specific symptoms of dysphagia in this particular group of patients, 66% reported coughing during or after food or liquid intake, 57% reported choking on liquids, and 50% reported choking on food. 60% of these patients said that dysphagia was a major distraction and was difficult to live with. And nearly 50% of these patients also reported that living with dysphagia left them feeling frustrated, discouraged, and depressed. And half of them reported living with a fear of choking. Unfortunately, this is one of the symptoms of MS that doesn't offer a lot of management options, aside from transitioning to the foods and liquids you can safely swallow until you've run out of options. And that carries with it a huge psychological burden. But studies like this one underscore the need for more research and better answers, because this is a symptom that, left unchecked, can ultimately become life-threatening or at best, life-limiting. MS can impact your balance and gait. It can impact your emotional well-being. It can impact your ability to safely swallow your food or use your arms and legs. Perhaps one of the most intimidating aspects of multiple sclerosis is the way that it can ambush you with such a broad range of symptoms. But the good news is that there are highly trained specialists who can help you best manage so many of the different symptoms that MS might throw at you. That's why you really want to consider a team approach to managing your MS. It's called comprehensive care, and in a moment, we'll be talking with my guest, Dr. Jacqueline Nicholas, about how and why the comprehensive care model makes so much sense for people living with MS. My guest today is Dr. Jacqueline Nicholas, a clinical neuroimmunologist specializing in MS and spasticity at OhioHealth in Columbus, Ohio. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Nicholas.
Thank you.
I guess to start us off, maybe you could tell us a little bit about OhioHealth and your role in treating MS there.
Sure. So OhioHealth is a large tertiary care center where we provide care for over 4,000 patients and their families living with multiple sclerosis in Central Ohio and beyond. I'm very happy to be working here as an MS specialist. I was trained as a neurologist and did my fellowship training in multiple sclerosis and neuroimmunology. And this is just a wonderful place to be able to work because my patients, I feel, are truly getting excellent care. So our model here has been really focusing on the whole patient and their family and caregivers to really provide care not only to stop the progression of their MS or to work to prevent new damage, but to really to help make their life as best as it possibly can be, even though they're living with multiple sclerosis, which at present is incurable. So in the comprehensive care model here, we have not only the MS specialist physicians, nurse practitioners, and MS nurses, but also other disciplines that I find are very, very important when patients are coming into the clinic. It's very nice to be able to have a neurophysical therapist and an occupational therapist and a speech therapist available during the clinic visit, so that if a patient is coming in and having issues with walking or balance, or maybe with handwriting, or difficulties with swallowing or speaking, that I can ask these folks to come in and meet with the individual during their visit to try to make that visit time more efficient, so they don't have to go all over town to be evaluated and to determine what might be best to help them. So sometimes we can implement a plan of therapy that they can undergo just by getting that information in clinic and carrying it out on their own at home, or we might decide that they actually need to be set up for therapy in a formalized way in the outpatient setting or via home health at home. We also have a dietitian. Diet in MS has been a really hot topic, and we do think that what we eat plays a significant role in inflammation. But right now, there's not one diet that's really proven to help fight MS, but we know that by eating healthy, our patients can live much better lives with MS because they're avoiding other comorbidities, or by helping to lose weight through diet, they may be able to walk better if they were carrying around excess. Other areas that are important in the comprehensive care model are certainly the underlying individual and their how they're feeling from a mental standpoint, and if there are any underlying mood issues, which are very, very common in MS. So depression occurs in about 50% of individuals with MS, and that can happen at any point in the disease, and anxiety is very common as well. And so, we find that if that's going on, MS is worse in terms of the symptoms somebody's experiencing, and so making sure that somebody has care for that is important. So we do involve our friendly psychologists and sometimes psychiatrists if medications are needed, but we find that counseling can be incredibly beneficial. Also involving urology to help with bladder issues. It's not that uncommon that with MS we can have issues with urinary urgency or frequency, or sometimes having trouble maintaining continence. And so making sure that we're offering the best treatment for that. It's nice to have the urologist available. And then also spasticity is an important area of MS care that is part of our comprehensive model. So for those of you who might not be familiar, that's a fancy doctor word for muscle stiffness that really occurs when somebody has some type of movement. And that can be very disabling or uncomfortable in individuals living with MS. And so that's something that we try to target early, and there might be techniques to treat it by stretching or physical therapy, but sometimes it requires more intensive treatments like oral medications to relax muscles, or botulinum toxin injections, or even devices called baclofen pumps. So there really is quite a bit that's involved in the comprehensive care model. One of the other nice things that we've been able to do here at OhioHealth is a wellness program, and that's actually been run by our neurophysical therapists here, where our patients who have MS, who maybe haven't been as active as they would like to be, but feel like they don't have a lot of motivation to get up and exercise, can enroll in a program where they undergo weekly exercise for an hour, 3 days a week, with a neurophysical therapist, basically to help guide them to do it safely. And then during those sessions, they also will have an educational component where a visiting dietitian or psychologist or counselor, somebody with some connection to MS care, will come and provide helpful information that they can use to further empower their ability to fight MS. And that program goes for about 12 weeks at a session. And so there have been a lot of individuals that we've cared for who've really had a benefit through that, where they found a way to get out and get moving and help improve their physical function through that program.
Wow. That is, I understand now why it's called comprehensive care, I think. I'm just curious. Now, I know and I don't even know what the term would be, but in the more traditional neurologist-centric model. The neurologist is kind of at the hub of care, and that neurologist may refer their MS patient to a specialist, or may not for a variety of reasons. But in the comprehensive care model, since it's based on kind of this very broad-based team, who's at the hub of that model?
So the patient and their family are the center of the hub, and all the care providers are around the circle. So in this model, we feel that the patient's needs and the family's needs are the most important, and that we're going to only involve individuals from the comprehensive care model if it makes sense and it's to benefit the patient and their family.
So given that sort of structure and the real focus on the patient and their family in the center of it all, does this almost require that patient and their family be fully involved in their own treatment? It's not the sort of thing where you can passively show up for your appointment and expect, quote unquote, the doctor will do everything for you. Is it a case of getting people more involved in their own care?
That's ultimately the goal. And so I would say that, the majority of individuals who are cared for in this model really do embrace it and come in and they let us know what's going on, tell us their symptoms so that we can help figure out who we need to involve and what needs to be done to help them. Certainly some folks, they don't realize that at first, and that's okay. And so really bringing them in and helping them realize what's out there and what's available, we can get them there. And we really feel that our goal in this MS center is to help educate individuals and their families so that they really understand everything as best as possible so that they can help fight this disease and really know, what to ask for or when to reach out and let us know that something isn't right and that they need an assessment or an evaluation. But certainly, there's different levels of help depending on how proactive someone is. But I generally find that the folks who are more proactive and their families are the ones who really do the best and I think get the most benefit out of this model.
When we're talking about healthcare in the United States, you can't talk about it very long without mentioning the role of the insurance companies, because they're the ones that are ultimately most often going to greenlight a certain treatment plan. How has the insurance industry reacted or responded to the comprehensive care model?
So in time, a lot of the services that we have available in the clinic, including the therapist and the social worker, those are positions that are really supported by separate outside resources. So they're not something that an individual patient is being billed for, which I think makes a difference because at the present time, even though this is a wonderful service and probably in any other model of business, that would be something where there was a fee involved. That's just not something that that insurance right now would help with. And so it's a real challenge across centers who don't have funding to be able to do this, to have the resources available. I think in the long run, by showing insurers that by using this model, that our patients, in my opinion, do very, very well and have most likely are having better outcomes than folks who don't have these resources available, that may in turn down the road lead to insurers supporting this from a better standpoint. But currently, to an insurer, this program would look just like any other patient who's coming in to see the doctor, where they'd be reflecting that they were in for a visit.
Why do you think this comprehensive care model works for MS patients? I'm wondering if the upside of the model has been measured yet, and if so, how, and what does that look like?
So in terms of, why it works, I think that it makes a lot of sense for anybody who has a family member with MS or has had MS themselves. They realize that MS can affect almost anything within the body because the brain and the spinal cord control most functions. And so as a result, that can cause a number of different symptoms and problems that may need different types of experts. And we named a few of them, including psychologists, psychiatrists, dietitians, therapists, social workers. And so it's difficult when somebody has MS, if they're taking off work to come to their doctor appointment, to also have to travel to these 5 or 6 or more other individuals, or if somebody is having more trouble with their mobility and maybe they require assistance from a family member or friend to get them to appointments, we need to make sure that the time that's spent to do that is efficient and that we're meeting all those needs as best as possible. And so I think that's really why it works, because I find when it's more parsed out and it's really a setting where you're just coming in to see the doctor and then we're trying to connect that individual patient to these other resources, sometimes there's not as good of a communication, and maybe the person isn't really set up for therapy or not set up for the right type of therapy, or it's just much more difficult for them to get the resources that they need. So I think it makes perfect sense why it works. Right now, I think that we need to have better research studies that are showing the benefits of this. And I think currently our center is looking at patient-reported outcomes. So when our individuals with MS are coming in to be seen in the clinic, we are giving them a series of questions that they fill out on the computer so that we can understand how they're doing from a physical standpoint and a mental standpoint and a MS standpoint overall. And that's helping us to assess the impact of what we're doing. And so there are several wonderful comprehensive centers throughout the country, fortunately. And so I think all of us working to show these benefits will only help to inform that down the road.
You just mentioned that there are several comprehensive care clinics located around the country, and that is absolutely great news. How does somebody know if they don't happen to be near or in central Ohio? How do they know how to find a comprehensive care practice?
So there's a couple of ways to do that. One excellent way would be to reach out to the National MS Society. They have a list of certified MS centers throughout the country. Some of that is available on their website, but could also be accessed by calling the 1-800 number for the National MS Society. Other resources, a lot of ways that I find that my patients find us is by word of mouth from their friends. So their local support groups or friends from church who have multiple sclerosis. I think there are lots of different ways to do that, but one way might be searching for, MS providers, searching for doctors who take care of MS and taking a look at their website and seeing, do they have these other resources available?
Those are all good suggestions, and I will make sure that we include a link to the MS Society's listing of MS centers in today's show notes, and hopefully that will help. And hopefully this conversation is sort of extending that word of mouth that you just referenced a minute ago. I think a couple minutes ago you said something along the lines of the fact that this is something that anyone who's lived with MS or a family who's been impacted with MS can easily see the benefit to. And I think you're absolutely right. Given that, why isn't every MS practice a comprehensive care practice? What is getting in the way of this becoming even more widespread than it already is?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think at the present time, the challenge has really been that I think we have, for a long time we had a shortage of MS specialists. I feel with all the breakthroughs in the field that trainees, so neurologists who are completing their residency, have been more and more interested in MS because they're seeing how much better we can take care of people with MS and how much better people with MS are doing and the breakthroughs that have been seen. So I'm very positive that we will have more neurologists available to help to build these practices. But I do think one of the shortcomings in the United States has certainly been, as we mentioned earlier, insurance. And so for a private neurologist who's maybe out practicing in the community, who's taking care of many different neurologic conditions, it can be a challenge to have all these resources available at hand in their community and to be able to financially support that for patients when insurance companies aren't necessarily helping to keep the roof on the building for that. And so, oftentimes these comprehensive care centers are really at larger institutions like teaching hospitals and universities or independent MS centers where there's a lot of research going on. And so I think that's really been the limitation. But my hope is, as you already alluded to, that if we can show that this has resulted in a significant benefit for these individuals, that in turn, certainly insurance companies would want that for their patients. And also, it would save them costs down the road. People weren't doing as well in the long run.
Well, yeah, I think you just uttered the magic words there from the insurance side. Is they, I can easily see why an insurance company would be incredibly interested in this, because it's kind of preventive care, so that you don't have the huge care expense down the road. And I can't imagine why they wouldn't embrace something like this. While we're talking, I also wanted to ask you about something that kind of relates to this. It's an online platform called Gather MS. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what Gather MS is, how it came to be, and how it kind of is reflective of this comprehensive care model that we've been talking about.
Yeah, so Gather MS is an online platform that's really kind of neat. So it started out as MS patients actually mentioning that they felt like they needed help with things in their daily life that were not necessarily related to MS, but things that they had to deal with while also fighting their multiple sclerosis. So there was a survey that was done called the MS Mindset Survey, and it was sponsored by Genentech. And basically they found that by interviewing about 800 individuals with MS and their support partners, that about 80% of the respondents said that they wished for help with everyday things like chores and cleaning their homes and errands and preparing meals when they weren't feeling well or able to get out to the store. And so even though there are some resources out there for these types of things, many of these individuals really didn't know where to go or where to find these resources. So this platform was put together to combine local resources and even national resources for individuals and their families to be able to access easily online and to look under different categories. So where we talked about the cleaning, things like day-to-day tasks or overall health and wellness, where can I go to find exercise, yoga, or different types of activities of that sort? What about emotional support or psychologic resources and resources related to work? What about jobs that might be available? So this has been a really neat platform, and it actually started out in a couple cities and has grown since its inception in the past year or two here. And so now it's in about 13 different cities. We have it here in Columbus, but it's anywhere from Boston to LA to Nashville, New York, South Florida, Pittsburgh. So it's called gatherms.com, and anybody can log in and use this resource. And I think that it's been a really neat resource that we haven't had before in MS that I've had some good feedback from my patients on.
Oh, this sounds great. If we call what you're involved in as comprehensive care, I kind of see this as comprehensive support. So I think if you can get it all in one place, if there's a single destination online that you can go to and get the kind of help that you need, I can see why it's expanded to additional cities. That's wonderful. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking a few minutes to talk with us today. I think that anybody who is living with MS it's a no-brainer as to why comprehensive care makes so much sense. And I hope that option is going to be available to more and more people over time, and hopefully over a short amount of time, because it really sounds wonderful. So let me thank you for not only talking to us, but for being a part of what I see is just, the very best possible way to seek care if you're living with MS. Thanks so much, Dr. Nicholas.
Oh, thanks, John. It was very nice talking to you.
Well, that's going to wrap up this 50th episode of Real Talk MS, and I hope you're ready for the next 50 because I am. And there are some pretty amazing plans already underway for a couple of special things that we'll be doing this fall. So if you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, you might want to do that today. And you can find Real Talk MS wherever you find the best podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the new Google Podcasts app, and if you have an Amazon Echo or Echo Dot at home, you can just say, Alexa, enable the Real Talk MS podcast. My name is John Strum. Thanks for listening to our 50th episode. I hope you decide to stick around for the next 50. And we'll catch you next time.